there is no more important economic relationship. And though it sounds like a cliche, it's not, because it is probably the most important and least curated, least celebrated, and least gardened economic relationship in the world.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Welcome back to the EdUp Canada podcast for today's Monday special edition, the day before the U.S. election. Because we all know in Canada, when the United States of America sneezes, Canada catches a cold. Well, tomorrow, Americans will wander into polling stations and take their most important democratic action, placing a vote. I'm joined today with a perfect guest to help us better understand the possible outcomes. But more importantly, the impacts tomorrow's election will have on Canada and Canada-U.S. relations. Evan Solomon is literally one of the smartest and nicest people I know. And I know when I asked him to join us today, he'd have some unique perspectives on the election. He would also give me abuse. He would pick on me, and we would catch up as old friends, as we've managed to do to get ready for today. Evan, there's a famous phrase, may we live in interesting times. And you're living in the middle of it in the United States right now, aren't you?
Well, first of all, it's great to see you, Mike. And we've known each other for a long time. And I was delighted to be asked to be on your podcast because I thought, Sangster, he's insightful. He's always got interesting things to say. You can trust him. And then you open the podcast with that BS flattery about me. And then I realized that this might be totally different. This might be the Sangster after a Rough Riders football game. We both might have had a few, and now you're just going to shoot the crap. And you got to lower expectations about me, come on.
Evan, you're one of those guys that's always well prepared, very thoughtful, and very, very intelligent. But you also enjoy a beer and a football game. And we got the CFL playoffs coming on the weekend. My Rough Riders are playing BC Saturday afternoon. And I will be planted in front of a television with a beer in my hand at least an hour before the game, ready to watch, because we love our team. Let's jump right in. You know Canadian American politics very well. Let's start with Canada-U.S. relations. Where do you think they might head after the election?
So for folks listening, I spent 20 years covering politics in Canada, in Ottawa. That's where Michael and I met and have hung out a lot. And then a couple of years ago, I started working in New York City, running a media company called G0 Media. And we do nonpartisan, fact-based coverage of politics. And we actually run a big summit in Toronto called the U.S.-Canada Summit, where we get 150 CEOs and we get government officials on both sides of the border coming up. And it's 500 people come to this because, look, for Canadians listening, and for, frankly, Americans who may be listening, there is no more important economic relationship. And though it sounds like a cliche, it's not, because it is probably the most important and least curated, least celebrated, and least gardened economic relationship in the world, because people think, you know what, leave it alone. It's pretty quiescent. It's a long, peaceful border. The truth is, though, there's a lot of spikes on the border now, and it's going to get worse. And it doesn't cut cleanly across political lines. So let me give you an idea. Donald Trump has said his favorite word in the world is tariffs. Tariffs are a significantly difficult issue, not just for Canada, but for all free trade countries. And remember, Republicans for 30 years, in our lifetime, Mike, like Republicans and conservatives used to talk about globalization and free trade. That was their trump card, as it were. Now it's actually the thing that they're against. They think it didn't work. It hollowed out manufacturing.
Republicans or Trump, Evan?
Well, both, because it's impossible now to disaggregate the two, because, it's a wishful thinking that there's a disaggregation. He's co-opted the party. He's taken it over. And the idea that there are some centrist Republicans that do not follow Trump. But at this point, the day before the election. It's a fiction to disaggregate Republicans and Trump. Donald Trump is the leader of the party. He speaks for the party. He's captured the party. He owns the party. And the leadership that used to be guardrails, checks, and balances on things like a 20% tariff on goods coming into the United States, those people have been purged. They're gone. They are not there in Trump 2.0. Lighthizer, who negotiated the first new NAFTA agreement, will come back, but these guys are hell-bent on tariffs. Now, those are going to be deeply painful for Canada because we'll fight for cutouts. We may not get them. And they'll be deeply painful for the American consumer because prices are going to go up. But just before we say this is Trump's a big bad man, all the tariffs, and he had a lot, he's a pro-American guy that he put in Trump 1.0, Joe Biden and now Kamala Harris have kept. It's not like they reversed them. They also are tariff heavy. Now, they're easier to negotiate with. They have a rationale, and they don't want tariffs at the same level, 20%. But make no mistake, the red team and the blue team are both on the same team, which is Team Tariff. The levels, the speed, and the cutouts and the politics of that are significantly important. But that's the biggest issue in this election for Canadians.
The politics and the message between red and blue are different, though. The way they portray tariffs are much different, in my opinion. The way he does it as a weapon comes across different in politics than it does from the Democrats.
Yeah, I look, that's true, but that's packaging. In the end of the day, if I put a piece of turd on your front door and light it on fire and I wrap it in wrapping paper or a garbage bag, either way, it's a piece of turd, it's on fire, and you got to step in it. And that's what a tariff is going to be for Canada. I think the difference is, do Democrats respond differently to negotiation? Canada demands cutouts, special status. And we have actually managed to do that when Joe Biden, when he did, and this is significant, he did something, folks, called the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a green policy. The name doesn't really tell you what it is, but essentially it was a form of industrial policy where the U.S. government was going to fund and subsidize huge industries as well as bring in tariffs. It was very impactful for Canadian industry, Mike, as you know, and Canada had to really work hard to get mind share and tell folks in the Biden administration, give Canada some exceptional cutouts, and they did. Will the Trump team listen to Canada at the same level? The answer is probably no, because it's a much harder ask. And by the way, Trump regards Justin Trudeau the way you regard shingles, not something he wants to get close to.
We've already got a couple of quotes that we can use to promote this podcast. Shingles and turds on the front steps. Is that what we've got so far from you, Evan?
Well, tomorrow's the election. I'm running out of metaphors, but I think that's probably both accurate.
What's it like sitting at your desk actually trying to monitor this campaign? Because from all appearances, it looks like insanity from the outside. I'm sitting at TV the other day watching, just sitting down, having a bite to eat, and Donald Trump rolls up with a garbage truck, wearing a vest, talking about a bunch of stuff that Biden's doing, Kamala Harris is doing. It seems to us to be one of the strangest campaigns to watch.
Yeah, I think there's two things. There's how much craziness have we normalized, and how much craziness is what we would call recency bias. Like, man, this is the craziest campaign we've ever seen. Until you read about the campaign of 1861 before the Civil War, when Lincoln was nominated and things were going crazy. Or look, American politics has got a lot of very divisive campaigns. If you and I were talking in the late 1960s, there was political assassinations, and it was a wild time. Streets were on fire. You might say this is a quiescent time. But look, this is a different campaign because there's a lot of unprecedented things. I mean, the lead up to the campaign is so remarkable, right? You've got 34 convictions. So you got a former president who's now a convicted felon who survived 2 assassination attempts, who then picked the singularly most unpopular vice presidential candidate in history, Vance, by polls.
Remarkable communicator, though. Remarkable.
He's gotten a lot better. But
yep.
Then you had Joe Biden, who was basically wearing an intellectual bib at the time. Like he couldn't get through things, even though I think he's had a significantly more consequential presidency than people give him credit for. I think the soft landing that America's had, I think actually Joe Biden his age became the biggest issue, and it obscured some of the significant achievements he'd made economically, building back after COVID. Foreign policy doesn't determine elections, but it makes American presidents look like they don't control things. Bad pullout of Afghanistan, the Middle East is on fire, lots of stuff that, obviously Ukraine. But Biden's had a pretty good economic, like the numbers, the facts are great, whether, people feel it or not. But, his age was just, that debate was so bad. It wasn't just bad to watch, as everyone has said, like you have to take the keys away from your dad. Like, okay, like it's time, you can't drive anymore. And that's a sucky moment. But then he had the singularly most unpopular vice president in history, Kamala Harris, to replace him. Then she runs like the first month of her campaign is as good as it will ever get. Trump runs as bad as it will ever get. Those were the eating the pets and the childless cat lady stuff. And here we are a day before, and they're neck and neck, and it's a coin toss, and it's going to come down to 7 states, 15 counties, probably about 200,000 people out of 150 million voters. So this is going to come down to get out the vote, a couple pockets of population. What will Arab Americans do in Michigan? What will Puerto Ricans do in Pennsylvania? What will suburban moms do across the board? What will Black and Latino males do? Like, this is coming down to the wire here. And anyone that gives you prediction is bonkers. It's a coin toss. It's a jump ball. It's Hail Mary pastime.
And the polling, there's a couple of pollsters I do like watching in the U.S., but the polling has just got to be ridiculous to try and actually judge, because there's so much baked into this now. There's so many, the people who love Trump. The people who like Kamala, they love her, but they're just baked right in there, and it doesn't matter what he does or what she does. They are not moving anymore.
That's true. And so the independent voters, the swing voters, the people who are registered voters but low propensity to vote, like women, higher propensity to vote than men, right? So that's why you saw an early voter turnout, women showing up in higher numbers than men, and Republicans getting the willies because of that. Democrats like to vote earlier than Republicans, right? Democrats have more mail-in than Republicans. Republicans have railed in against mail-in. So are you going to get the Democrats feeling real good early because they got early votes? Then Republicans get the surge in the walk-ins, and then they think they're winning, and then you slingshot back to the mail-ins, and then the Democrats come. Either way, come Wednesday morning, save some beer from your football game because you will need it.
Well, ironically, we're coming together for a conference in Toronto. So we put everybody together in a room Tuesday night to just watch. And the joke has been, we might as well keep the room for Wednesday. We might need it for Thursday.
Book it for the week. I think, and don't quote me on this, I've just got to go look. I think Pennsylvania is going to take 13 days to count its paper votes, right? So
they do the mail-ins, I believe, are much later. Maybe it's 13. There's a week or something they wait before they even open them, which I cannot understand after the last election why they would still be operating on that system. There's no reason they can't be in a room and crack them open at 8:01.
I mean, there's a lot of things that I'm a big, like everyone, I admire the genius of Elon Musk. I may not necessarily like what he says all the time, but if Elon Musk can catch a rocket plummeting from the sky in a pair of tweezers, can't we count votes overnight? Like, come on, man. Like, I think voters are like, I can't believe we could do A, but not B.
Before we move to Canada, because you still keep a close eye across the border, I know you do, but let's just have a quick rundown here. You said it's a sucker's game to pick an election, so let me make you do it. It's one of the biggest suckers I know. Let's go through a few. Pennsylvania, Trump-Harris.
So let me just give you the overall. You and I have long functioned under the Yogi Berra rule, which is the only thing I won't predict is the future. So I just want to give this caveat to people. I don't like predictions. Number one, this is the worst time to predict. So all of these predictions are low conviction based on some polling, but it's a jump ball. Everything's within the margin of error. So this is like, I really think it's a mug's game to predict, but as a scenario game, I have no problem. Our call at Eurasia Group is low conviction probability that marginally the path to victory for Trump. It's more likely Trump than Harris, but that's a low conviction probability, meaning it could change on a dime. This is not like this is what it is. Anything else would be a surprise. if Harris wins, it's not a surprise if Trump wins. But we think on the margins, the road for Trump is slightly higher. Pennsylvania, the polling's all over the map. And we'll see what happens with the Puerto Rican community after, that comedian called the Puerto Rico a garbage island that really impacted the Puerto Rican community. And that's got a very significant Puerto Rican community in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is a very complicated neck. And I just saw a poll the other day that showed Trump up by 1.5. I've seen one that Kamala Harris is up. Both of you and I, you've been in this business for a long time, Mike. That's margin of error stuff. So whoever wins Pennsylvania is probably going to win it. So you're asking me the kind of key question here. I wouldn't really make a call on Pennsylvania. Trump looks like he's got the numbers. My gut, though, is just talking to people, her get out the vote team is significantly more sophisticated. And you know this from campaigns. It's not about the memes and the Twitter and who gaffed and Biden calls them garbage and Trump said he's going to help women and they did. All that stuff is BS at this point. It's all the machine. Her machine is better than his machine. It's better funded. And so my call is a squeaker in Pennsylvania for Harris.
Trump voters as I said earlier, they're just so dug in that it doesn't matter. He can say something like he did the other day, that I'm going to protect women no matter whether they like it or not. And it just gets passed on to the next day. It's just like another comment that it's just baked into the process. So maybe instead of that, why don't we talk Senate and House? Is there anything there you're looking at? Because that might be more influential the other day than the presidential race. Because it's looking to me like there's a good probability that the Democrats might take the Senate. But even that's, you're wincing.
I don't think they take the Senate.
I thought there was a chance that they were headed in that direction. So,
I mean, look, this is probably the worst election for predictions, and I feel like I'm mealy-mouthed on it. Look, if Trump wins Pennsylvania, he could sweep the House and the Senate. So he have all three, and you're in a different world here. There is a path to all these scenarios, okay? But, it's not like in Canada where we've got Justin Trudeau down by, 19 points from Pierre Poilievre, and you've got someone coming on a podcast go, I'll tell you what's going to happen. Trudeau's going to come back, and Ontario's going to flip back, and BC's going to flip back, and he's going to sweep Quebec. And if Trump wins, this is the scenario, and we've come into and you're just like, really? That's a crazy call. Like, wow. We don't have that in the United States. We've got literally a coin toss where someone's going to come on and say, Trump's going to win, and he's going to win. And someone's going to say, I told you so. It's like, you doofus. It was a 50% call.
You rolled the dice, and the Republicans are paying you in that call. So you started the transition. I was going to move over to Canada. I jokingly like to think that we like to think we're a little nicer and a little bit of friendlier. But you and I have both been through campaigns in this country. I wouldn't compare them to the one that's going on here, but I went through the free trade one in Canada, which was a nasty, vicious campaign. So let's talk Canadian politics, because you still keep an eye on it. What do you see? How long do you see the Trudeau government surviving, and what do you see happening there? You talked about the relationship, so let's talk about it that way.
Yeah, we do follow the Canada-U.S. and the Canadian political scene closely. I write a column every week on it on our newsletter called G0 North. So we're pretty active in there. Trudeau, how long will Trudeau last? If he sticks around, and remember, prime ministers, it's like what F. Scott Fitzgerald said about bankruptcy, and this is how prime ministers end. It happens really slowly, and then all of a sudden. Brian Mulroney was going to stay forever, and then he didn't. Justin Trudeau's all in until he's not. And then the question is, how long is it a poison chalice? Does the next person that takes that after a leadership convention have 2 months? Are they Doug Ford in Ontario, who jumps in after the other leader got booted at for some kind of scandal and he wins a massive majority? Is he Christy Clark that can pull off a unlikely victory? Or does he leave someone to do like Kathleen Wynne after Dalton McGuinty? So there's lots of scenarios. Look, it turns out let's assume this scenario. Justin Trudeau ain't going anywhere. The little rebellion inside caucus becomes like a mewling bunch of whiners that he eventually ignores, and nothing happens. All they've done is put a squib of lack of enthusiasm all over Liberals. The guy can't control his own caucus. No one even in his own party likes him, and he'll get absolutely eviscerated in an election, even though it'll be maybe closer. That's one scenario. And that happens, I think, in the late spring. obviously the early fall is the latest, but I don't think Jagmeet Singh will not wait all the way. Jagmeet Singh, if you look at the fundraising, he's broke. Like he's raised in this quarter, 1.3 million. He can't run a campaign. The Conservatives have raised $28 million this year. Okay. By the way, in the U.S., where Kamala Harris raised $1 billion, right? Just to give you the difference between the elephant-sized campaign that goes on forever in our little campaign, but they've raised 28 million. I think the Liberals have done 16 million over the year, and that the NDP have done not even close to that. So Jagmeet Singh's in no rush. The Bloc Quebec was in no rush.
They've never had it so good, and are they going to win more seats? No, they can sit there where they are.
But Trudeau, the Bloc, the Conservatives, and the NDP have one thing in common. They all want to run against Justin Trudeau. They don't want a Kamala Harris. They don't want a new person, because then they got to redo the playbook. And that's why you saw recently Pierre Poilievre say to our friend Bill Carroll on in an Ottawa radio station, CFRA, I think that he has a moral responsibility to stay. First of all, he doesn't, but Pierre is dying to run against a guy that he thinks he can knock out in the first round and then slide around the ring, on confetti.
I'm not saying it's comparable, but Senator Brazeau thought he could knock him around the ring too. He is always surprised us in an election campaign, but this is a much higher hurdle now.
Well, I would say this. Look, you're 100% right. And I've Justin Trudeau, I remember speaking to him before that campaign, and he's confident. He likes to be underestimated. Conservatives have made the fatal error for them of always thinking he's dumb and weak and bad. And ask Tom Mulcair, Stephen Harper, Andrew Scheer, Aaron O'Toole, at one point Elizabeth May. They've all come and gone, and this guy's still 9 years in. But the qualities that serve you well at the beginning of your political career, which is you're self-confident, you think you can overcome massive odds, those serve you. 9 years, 3 elections later, those look like you're not listening, you're alone. Look, Stephen Harper won 3 elections and then he got eviscerated. He got his butt knocked out and he couldn't understand why. But you know why? Because 9 years is a hell of a shelf life. That's a good run. There's nothing to be ashamed of.
There's not a long list of people who've been prime minister for 10 years. It's a very, very short list. And I was actually reminded by a conservative the other day, the favor Harper did for us. He did leave us with 90 odd seats. He got eviscerated, but still had almost 100 seats in that caucus that let them come back. But it's been a long haul. So we always ask people a couple of questions. So I'm going to ask you, because I was nice to you earlier and called you intelligent. You're also a nice guy, Evan, and we miss being able to have a beer and go to a game when you're here in Ottawa, like we used to. We're going to talk about 2 things. One, what's the greatest skill that you think has made you successful? Because our audience is also students. We'll talk a little bit about Canada Finish, but students and people who are looking at our career colleges as a way to go learn. What's the greatest skill that has made you successful? And did you gain it late in life, early life? Are you lucky to have it? What is it that you think has made you good? Mine, I'm honest about it. I'm pretty good at walking into a room and talking to people and not being unabashed, being able to just chat with people and start a conversation and build a relationship. What do you think yours is that you've developed or had?
Well, I think for me, it would be a fearlessness to try new things. So I always say to people who are in college or university or high school, whatever educational route they want to go, the world tells them that they're inexperienced, they're young, and just to wait. It's really like, hey, look at your resume, you've got nothing on it. And so you become disempowered. So you become a taker, not a maker. And my first job was, I was a freelance journalist in Hong Kong for a while after university, after I finished a degree. But then I started a business with my buddy. And let me tell you how much I knew about starting magazines and a media company with my degrees and with my buddy's degree. I knew nothing. I mean, we made every mistake in the book. But the asset of being young is you've got no mortgage, no kids. If you fail, as some great entrepreneur told me, fail upward. So the first thing I would say is the advice I took is if you're going to do something with all your heart, but make it a big enough and ambitious enough project that if it doesn't work out, you fail upward, not downward, not something so boring and so low risk and so conventional, because young people who are just getting an education have they're smart, they're fast, they have little to lose, and even failure can be a form of success. At our age, you got a mortgage, you got kids. If you fail, it's pretty consequential. Someone's gonna lose their, someone's not gonna be able to pay the rent. So so you're more powerful than you think. That's the first thing. Two, you probably have better creative ideas. Three, experience sometimes can talk you out of things. A lack of experience and an ignorance is a form of bravery, and it can actually make you pursue your ideas and your passions. Three, don't sell yourself short. And you can take some chances. And if it doesn't work out, and I would say finally, I'm very good at asking for help. Look, life is a search for teachers.
Wherever you find them.
Right. Could be your dad or your mom. It could be your best friend. It could be an uncle. It could be a teacher in school, a professor. Could be a friend of the family or someone you met. You have to think, if you have 10 teachers at the end of your life, people that change your life, you're like, you've won the lottery. Like, it's very scarce.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to people and seek advice. There's no price to asking a question. To say, look, can you give me a hand here? I need some advice. Especially when you're young, everybody wants to. First of all, you're trading on the vanity of middle-aged and old people who think that they have something to say. By the way, they may have nothing to say, but at least you'll know. But ask questions and put good advice in your pocket and create your own personal board of directors of mentors who care about you. That was something I really did, and I benefited from super smart people who I can name to this day, teachers in my life that I owe my life to. In the good times and the bad times, they stick with you and they help you. And that's really important.
So perfect segue. Give me a minute on who's that one mentor or two mentors that we always ask people. Who's that mentor that changed your path? And then I always ask, do they know that they were? Did you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, look, I was lucky. In high school, I can name him. Jeff Roberts, who was my English teacher, went on to become the principal of the school, still a friend to this day. And I'm talking about 35 years later, I talked to him. Bill Petto, my English teacher. When I published my first novel, he was in the front row at the Harbourfront Reading Series. Couldn't believe it. Roy Graham, another teacher. I still talk to him to this day. Now he's a professor. Changed my life, believed in me. I've told them. Obviously, my father, who passed away, I was lucky. I had great parents. But I'm going to tell you something. I've had a chance to interview the most powerful, famous people in the world for 30 years in my jobs. And people always ask, like, who was your best interview? And, like, what was the Dalai Lama like? What was the president like? And I'm going to tell you straight up, the people that have had the most inspirational impact on my life are my best friends. Andrew Heinzman, who I started a business with and we've co-written stuff with, and we ran a business for 10 years. I have a friend group that has been like, the Beatles are the Beatles, not because they got to talk to other great musicians, because there's just four guys from the same place that hung out a lot. I always say to my kids and to myself, you got to find your tribe. If you're at college right now,
find your tribe.
Find your tribe. And if your tribe might not just be the people that happen to be in your class. My best friend, I'll tell you this quick story. I was in Montreal, and there was a guy a year ahead of me. I thought he was so cool. He was so smart. He was in a band. But he was so smart. And I thought his friends, I wasn't into his social group. And I literally walked up to him and I said, "Hey man, I think your friends they're not going to help you out. I need someone to kick my ass. And I've got some ideas. I think you need someone to kick your ass. I think I should be that guy." And he looked at me like, "You're an idiot." I didn't, we barely knew each other. But I said, "No." And he became my best friend. His kids are my god kids and vice versa. You got to find your tribe and you got to go get it. And that's key.
Yep. Surround yourself with the best people and you'll be the best people, right? It's a good one. I'm going to hit you with one last question. You can go where you want. You can go American politics, Canadian politics, life in general. Take your family out of it, because we all have family stress that keeps us up at night. But what keeps you up at night? What makes you worry about the world these days?
Folks, this is like the day before the U.S. election.
Yep.
Obviously, you know, you know, a lot of things worry me. They concern me because there's a lot of fundamental challenges. We're in a world where we're faced with a lot of hatred, where the polarization. I don't mind people. Look, democracies in the United States and Canada, the blessing of living is we get to disagree with each other without fearing for our safety. You're on the left, he's on the right, he's in the center, she's in the middle. Who gives a crap? But we're getting to a point where when you disagree with people, you have to worry about your safety. I worry about that. That should not happen in democracy. You can have political opponents, but not political enemies. Two, we are not actually dealing with the problems. We're dealing with culture war distractions as opposed to fundamental problems. There are real problems that have now, like if you can't say like, oh, climate change, all of a sudden you're in like a culture war when you're just trying to have a practical solution about efficiency, right? Like if you live in Ontario and you're listening to this, I'll give you an example. I have a daughter who's 21 right now, okay? When she was born, there was like 35 to 40 smog days in Toronto where we were told to stay inside do you remember smog days, Mike?
Yep, I remember smog days, yep.
And you were told to stay inside, not because the air was clean inside, the air was crappy, but because you wouldn't move around a lot. So it was like really bad. Now we're in Canada, so there's only like 75 good days anyway that you could go outside in the summer and play, and 35 of them were smog days. Then they closed the coal plants, and there was big scandals about it. But you know how many smog days there are now in Toronto and Ottawa and all around the country? 0.
Mm-hmm.
And our kids grew up without it after they were about 9 or 10 years old. And the kids today don't. You know what? That's politics that did that. When was the last time someone mentioned that was a really good thing to do? You know why? Not because you're left or right, but because you either have asthma or you don't, because you can play outside or you don't. So I feel we've lost sight of the idea that politics can actually do good stuff. And it can, and we've lost that. And I worry about that.
I had the good fortune of being around Ottawa during Mulroney-Turner elections. It was never personal. It was never nasty. It was policy-based, and we disagreed on things, but it was not. I wasn't a big player in anything, don't get me wrong, but I worry about that culture thing too, that I was recently in California spending some time with family and realizing I'm careful about what I say even there, a very democratic state, but you don't start the conversation out of fear that you're starting a culture conversation. So
hold on, I got one last thing to say about that. And especially for people in colleges, because I know that's your main audience, right? What worries me for myself, but also for young people is that there's this two things are happening. One, there's a belief that the next generation will not do as well as the current one, that people think things are getting worse, not better. And a lack of belief and optimism about the possibility of progress is really damaging. And we have to realize that actually the metrics things are getting better. You doesn't feel it. There's a bad vibe going on. But the second thing is the blaming others for your own circumstance, the kind of self-victimization, looking for scapegoats like, oh, it's immigrants. Oh, it's, it's climate. Look, every generation has had challenges. Whoever's listening, you think you had more challenges than in the 60s with what was going on, more challenges during the Great War, more like every generation feels like it's the hardest. And then the next generation comes along and said, boy, did you guys ever have it easy? The truth is, we have to stop internalizing that things are automatically worse because they're not. And two, that the best thing to do is victim blame and therefore you stop empathy. We need a little more self-reliance. Things are good. I'm not trying to be Pollyanna. It's hard out there. But if you arm yourselves with the right tools, there's a real, Canada is still a great place. The United States is still a great place to make dreams come true. But you got to stop self-victim. You're not a victim of things. You have to think of yourself as an instrument of action. I think that's important.
Love it. Great way to end the episode. I will point out to this generation, though, we had it harder. We did have to walk both ways to school uphill in the snow. And whether our children believe that or not, that is the reality of what we did deal with, though, right? We had it harder.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, we're still in the snow right now.
It's we're there, but we sure lot. I got to tell you, Halloween last night, 24 degrees in Ottawa. That was a different kind of temperature than my Halloween costumes always came with a parka growing up in Winnipeg. So what do I know? Evan, thank you for this. We heard some interesting phrases. I've forgotten one already, but turds on a stoop and an intellectual bib for Biden. That's the best description. I didn't jump in when you were saying that, but that was maybe one of the most painful pieces of television I've ever watched. Within 3 minutes in, to the point that not only do we feel bad, I think there was a little part of President Trump that felt bad too. I think he genuinely had a moment of, is he okay? While that was going on. Whether we believe that or not, he actually had any real fear about it, whether he was okay or not. There was a look in his eye a few times like, are you okay, President Biden?
Well, I mean, his line, where he goes, I don't know what he said, and I don't think he knows what he's saying, was
Brilliant.
You chip that on the obituary of a political life, because that was the end.
Yeah. So I will say to everybody, as we sign off this week's EdUp Canada podcast, find Evan Solomon, find him online, read his stuff. One of the most thoughtful, intelligent people you'll read. Always on the edge, but always a little bit of fun. And Evan, I miss you in Ottawa as a friend, but also as a great interviewer. You were so good on the air interviewing people and pushing them to the right level, always respectful. And there's a few guys like that, like David Cochran now, I think is a spectacular interviewer. I see you nodding. You feel the same.
David's a great guy. Look, Vashi's great. Yep. David's great. There's lots of great journalists doing a hard job out there. But Sangster, you're the best, man. You're great. Folks, there's no one. I would just say, if you're listening and you want a mentor, knock on this guy's door. I mean this sincerely. This guy was a community builder. We'd knock on his door to help out build our community, and lots of nonprofits that I was involved with. And the first call for the whole city was Mike Sangster, because he was always there. And it's a true testament to the kind of guy you've been, the community builder you are, and why you're still working to support young people and people of all ages to make it work. You're a true community builder, buddy. And I love chatting with you. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Checks in the mail. I'll see you in New York soon, I hope, and we'll catch up. You're one of the great guys, and we had a lot of fun with that River Keepers Gala, and made a real difference in the Ottawa River. So, Evan, thank you. And to all of our listeners, look forward to catching you all next week on the next edition of the EdUp Canada podcast. Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4 or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts, so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.